Hello and welcome to this week's The Creative Connection. I am Cyndi Thompson, your host on these conversations that we're having around connecting to ourselves, connecting to our creative spirit, connecting to one another. So, as we roll into the end of the month and move on into July, we are standing at a threshold, literally standing at a threshold to the second half of the year, the last two quarters. And as I am standing at this threshold, and I think about the conversations that I've had over the course of the last year, because July 25th will mark my 1 year endeavor of having this podcast and these conversations. And I have noticed that life is beginning to ask new questions of me and of those that I am speaking with. So I am embarking in the month of July on a new series called When Life Begins Asking New Questions. It's the Threshold series. And I will be taking my podcast to 2 times a month. And one of those will be with a guest conversation. So I want to start today sort of giving you a flavor of what's to come. And I want to share a little bit of a story, not as a teacher, not as a friend, but as a fellow traveler on this journey of life. You know, over the last several months, we've explored themes of awareness, intention, transition, and listening to ourselves again and again. For me, anyways, there is an idea that has bubbled to the surface, and that is there comes a point in time in all of our lives, I believe, where the questions begin to shift and change. So the story that I want to share with you today is how I became the artistic director of a small theater group. And what were some of the questions that were popping up as this shift happened? And I will tell you, going into it, that was not my intention. In fact, I chose this community when I moved back to the greater Seattle area because it was a stage that I could perform on. I could share stories. I could make an impact with the audience by portraying a character that they might see themselves in. And it was 2016, 2017. I had been with this group since 1997, since shortly after the birth of my second son. And the gentleman who founded the group was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer. And he and his wife, who's the producer, looked at me and said, "Tag, Cyndi, you're it. I think you are the only one that can begin to take this on into the future, to leave my legacy of having a space of fellowship and connection and storytelling, and that all people are welcome on the stage, whether you are an actor that has a long resume, or if this is the first time that you've ventured out onto the stage, there is a space for everyone. And there's a space for everyone, no matter their age." At first, I was honored. I was honored that he thought that I could do this job. But then the questions started to bubble to the surface. Why me? What about my desire to tell stories as an actor? What about my desire to play? And so the questions started to shift. They were, well, Couldn't you share stories as the director? Couldn't you share stories from the designer standpoint? Couldn't you, in fact, make a bigger impact, maybe, as a director? You see, I believe that story is what can make and change the world. It can make it a better place. It can help us see love. It can help us see belonging. It can help us see connection. So I leaned into that. And then my dear friend passed away, and I was on my own with the help of his wife. It has now been almost 10 years. And what was a small bedroom community theater with a very insulated group of people has grown to be truly a large community theater where we are bringing talent from all over the greater Seattle area. And I have people interested in sitting in the audience from all over the greater Seattle. I had never, prior to this experience, directed a musical. I can direct the heck out of a dramatic or comedic piece, but when it came to a musical, I was intimidated by that. However, I learned that I really needed to have a good circle of people around me, including a musical director, that we spoke the same language and could communicate what it was that we were trying to do together. You know, interesting, as I think back upon that, there were some assumptions that I made. That the discomfort that I was feeling making this shift from actor to director and then to artistic director and then to teaching people and mentoring people felt very uncomfortable. Why? Well, it was the little voice inside my head, the critical one, that said, well, who are you to say that you have the talent to do this? I also have quite a bit of uncertainty. Is this going to work, or am I going to break it? Am I going to completely cause this to be run into the ground? And what's interesting is 2020 happened and we didn't do shows in fact, I had just gotten the rights for a play. We had literally had 2 rehearsals when everything shut down. Man, that created a great deal of restlessness. I had just taken this over. I had just taken this on. I had just committed to going all in, and everything shut down. And then all around me, theaters started closing because they couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And how were they going to sustain themselves? Because they began to lose their spaces that they had been grandfathered into. I wondered, is this going to happen to us? But then I started asking what if questions. And this is the thing that I find very important when I am in conversation with someone who is standing at the threshold, whether they're a client or a friend or a family member, and they're standing at a threshold of decision making. And the challenge that they're having is they feel comfortable going down this path, but they really are being drawn to this path over here, which is very uncomfortable and does not have certainty. And they don't know if it's going to work out, but this is the path that they really want to take. And so that's the threshold conversation that I have with them. And I start to ask them, what if? What if you didn't choose this path? And then I'm quiet and I listen. What I find out is that the discomfort happens and the uncertainty happens, and they wonder if they're going to become a failure by going down that path when this one has been so successful and so easy to do. And then I go, well, what if none of those things are true? What if it becomes very comfortable and you become more successful and you become very grateful for this new path that you live? Or what if this is life simply asking a new question? Because perhaps you have changed so much that this ordinary path, this well-worn path of your life doesn't fit anymore. I posted a LinkedIn article yesterday that spoke about this. And if you're not connected to me on LinkedIn, the link will be in the show notes. It's interesting because these thresholds that we all encounter and that the conversations that I have with the various people that I have are common thresholds. We all experience them. Career transitions, whether it is forced upon you, like a layoff, or whether you are like I had been back in 2020, sitting at your desk at work, and you realize that this is not the job for you anymore. Maybe it's your children have all grown and left the house, and you are needing to rediscover the partner that you've married because you are an empty nester. What if that is the opportunity for you to pursue some of those things that you put on hold the entire time that you were so focused on your children? What if it's the opportunity for you and your partner to begin re-experiencing some of that love that got you those children? Or maybe you are sitting on the cusp of retirement and the decision around retirement. This is a common one I find in many of the clients that I work with, is they are not sure what retirement's going to look like. And they are on the cusp of, and they're stalling making the decision as to when to retire because they have no idea what's going to happen. This has become so comfortable and so easy that if I retire, what is going to happen now? Or maybe it is your significant relationships. They're changing. You know, I've mentioned over the last couple of weeks that I belong to a community that I've noticed that my relationship to the community has shifted. I don't know if it's because I have outgrown the community or if the community has stopped growing and I continue to grow. Now, those are two different things. If I am growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, and I realize that I can't get anything from this space anymore, I have outgrown. Versus the group is not growing, but the space in the place that it's in is growing. And I feel as though I and maybe a handful or two other people are growing, but there are many that aren't. And a lot of tension and friction happens. I think it's actually that one in this particular environment. I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm still trying to weigh in on that one. But maybe it's your significant relationship. Maybe you are empty nesting, or you're moving towards retirement, or you're shifting a career, or you have a career decision to make that maybe involves a move And you have to have that difficult conversation around what will happen if I do it and what will our life be like if I don't do it. Those are tough conversations, but it's a threshold conversation or loss. You know, when my husband and I were in our 50s, we are now in our 60s, our mid 60s, it was definitely a season of loss. We lost in the course of 2 months both of our mothers, and we discovered in the following 6 months that both of our father's memories were failing. And so the loss of what felt like our home, our North Star, was fading right out from underneath us. At the same time, we were experiencing things in our own lives. My husband's second diagnosis with cancer. I was having some challenges with my physical health in terms of my hips were failing and I needed to have them replaced. So there was an awful lot of change and shift. And that is when my friend who had the brain tumor passed away. There was a lot of loss in that time period. And it was a threshold. It was a threshold of I could stay stuck in this loss and this mire of loss and what I am giving up, or I could make the decision to move forward with my life. Or maybe it's a creative awakening. You have a passion project that you loved when you were younger and you put it on hold for your career and your kids and your partner, but now it is calling you to do it again. I find this a lot with people that come and audition for me for that theatrical group. People who have put this desire to play on stage, to play on hold. And it's somewhere in their 30s and 40s and 50s and even 60s when they begin to dive into it. And then they go, oh my gosh, this is who I am. I need to be sharing stories. And we delve a little bit into that, but that's a threshold. Or maybe it's a leadership transition, whether it's someone that's leading you or you leading others. You notice a shift in how you lead. These are all threshold, and they are so common. We all experience them. So I have two reflection questions for you with regards to the thresholds that we all encounter. The first one is, perhaps you're experiencing or starting to feel a rumbling in one of these areas. And you're beginning to wonder if it's because you've lost your way. So, what if this feeling isn't a sign that you've lost your way? Really sit with that. If you are experiencing something, really sit with that. Is this because I've lost my way, or is this an invitation into something new? I find that with many of the people that cross my path, either as clients or as students, acting students, or as participants in the theatrical group that I work with, it begins quite often with a whisper, a nudge, a longing, a feeling like you're being drawn or pulled towards something. That is the Threshold series. We're gonna dive deep into what is leading us to the next segment or chapter of our life. Or maybe it's a writing of the course. You know, when I was young, I had a certain path that I thought I was going to go down. And I got to college and I started down that path, but then I made a 180. And I made a 180 because I met a man that I fell in love with. And at the time, the desired career I wanted was not going to fit that relationship. That was a threshold point. Relationship or career? What is the most important thing? Now, I found that 11, 12, 13 years into our marriage, I was able to go back to that path after we had had 2 children, and I had a little bit more flexibility in my schedule, and I was more flexible as a person. So the Threshold series we're going to look at for the next 6 months. And in July, we're going to talk about the whisper. Before any major changes come, there's a feeling, a question, a longing. The first episode in that series will be on July 8th, and I will be having a guest that day, Lai Smith. And then we get to the threshold, what we've begun to discuss today, the threshold, what happens when we know we can no longer stay where we are. We are standing at the threshold of a door or a train or a plane or a car or a yard. And we have a decision that we need to make. How do we get to the decision making? And I will have a guest the first Tuesday. I think it's this. Yeah, it's the first Tuesday of August. And then when we get to December, we're going to talk about the gap. We are this person today, but we are becoming something else. So we're going to talk about the becoming, the making the decision and moving forward. And how do we trust who we are becoming as being us? We're so used to being this person over here. But this person over here is beginning to feel uncomfortable and old and stale. It doesn't fit. It doesn't feel good anymore. This person over here, this new person of us, the person we're becoming. But how do we know that that's the right person? It's a trust. We're going to talk about trusting our intuition, trusting that nudge, that whisper, that longing. And I will have a guest as well. And then when we get to October, how do you, now that you trust this person you're becoming, how do we build a life that reflects that person and learn to leave behind and shed the parts of us that no longer fit? And I will have a guest as well. November is about courageous choice. And now I have done this on purpose because as we get to the new year, we all are striving for something new. What is that thing I'm going to do in the new year? How am I going to be, quote unquote, a better person? That's what a lot of New Year's resolutions are. And I don't like New Year's resolutions because normally by the third week of January, we've given up on them. But it's more about leaning into who we're becoming and courageously making choices to act. What happens when the threshold asks us to act? The threshold asks us to act. And I hope to have a dear friend on for that conversation in November. And then when we get to December, I want us to reflect back on the wisdom of this journey that we've taken from July and August and September and October and November. And I hope to have a panel of 6 people, not the same people that you've just listened to, but another 6 people who have been guides or Sherpas or divining rods for my journey. They are guides and Sherpas for other people, but they are the people who had a great impact on me as I began this journey of becoming who I am today in 2020. It is my hope during each of the guest interviews and then the following solo episode where I'll offer reflection questions and exercises and perhaps a meditation or two for you to integrate what we're talking about. It is my hope that when we get to December, you'll have an idea of who you are becoming in this next segment or chapter of your life. I have noticed over the course of my lifetime that each of the decades has sort of existed as a chapter. My family moved a lot from the time I was born until the time I was 10. And then from the time I was 10 until the time I was 20, there was a lot of self-discovery of who I was. There was a lot of doubt, and there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of questioning, and there was a lot of looking outside myself for the answers of who I was, which it is my belief that we do that a lot as people because that's how we've learned. And then in my 30s and 40s and 50s, I began to rediscover my own internal voice. And while there were elements of that 10 to 20-year-old me that were me, the ones that didn't really belong to me that I had adapted because someone else said I was good at it, in my 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even now in my 60s, they are melting away. And what I am left with is my core self. So I invite you, if you have been sensing a shift in your life at all, or if you have even been asking some of these questions or others that you can't quite answer, or if something inside of you has been whispering that there may be more to life than what you are presently experiencing, I hope you'll join us on this journey for the next 6 months. Remember, you don't need to know exactly what the answers are. In fact, you don't need to know the answers at all. What I believe is necessary in your backpack for this journey are questions, curiosity, and the openness to listen to yourself first. And maybe someone else to help ask you more questions so that you can dig deeper in your own self. All of this requires you to have courage. Have courage to look at yourself in the mirror and ask the hard questions about where are you going? Who have I been and who am I becoming? As we come to a conclusion today, I want to share 3 journal prompts with you that you can work on this week, next week, and then I'll be back on July 8th with my first guest on the podcast that we're going to be calling The Whisper. The first one is, what part of my life feels most alive right now? I'll repeat that. It will also be in the show notes. What part of my life feels most alive right now? The second one is, what no longer feels like it fits? Maybe it feels like you're being suffocated or something is really tight. So the question again is, what no longer feels like it fits? And the last question for you to consider and journal on for the next couple of weeks is, what question is life asking me in this season? What question is life asking me right now? If you've been feeling restless, uncertain, or called towards something you cannot yet name, I want you to know you are not alone. Many of us find ourselves standing at a threshold or thresholds throughout our life. And sometimes the threshold is where the journey begins. I wish you a beautiful day. I look forward to hearing your comments. Please comment below. Subscribe, share this with those that you think might find some wisdom in what's about to come. And I will see you on July 8th. Thank you for being here.